Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now, sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. I didn't plan to remember the seat map by the shape of the shadows. On Flight 217 from New York to London, a red-eye that always smelled faintly of coffee syrup and reheated bread, I was the most junior flight attendant on the crew. We had a full Boeing 777-343 in economy, and you could tell before pushback that half the cabin was already resigned to sleeping crooked. My jump seat was mid-cabin, left side opposite door 3L. The purser, Lena, ran the forward galley like a metronome. Marco owned business class with a patient smile that never moved his eyebrows. Jules worked aft with me, and Oksana, sharp eyes, whisper voice, floated between the galleys like a ghost who could fold linen. On the manifest I'd scrolled through in the jet bridge, I'd noted the familiar mix. Families hunting summer, consultants in pressed navy, a touring violinist whose case kept bonking the armrests, 2 college kids in matching hoodies, and a couple who clearly flew enough to consider the overhead bins personal property. On page 2 was an annotation I'd never met before tonight. Fam on board, Kelly C. It was routine enough, Federal Air Marshal, but still a little electric. I didn't know who Kelly was until she came up the jet bridge last in boarding groups. Nondescript in a soft gray jacket, the kind of person you didn't quite notice even as you were noticing her. She pressed a short, quiet nod in my direction and kept moving. We pushed from JFK's Terminal 8 just past 8 p.m., long enough after thunderstorms that the ramp glistened with the runway lights turned into stars. The engines wound up into that low, ground-shaking chord that you feel more than hear. I watched the city fall away from my jump seat window at 3L, the lights sluicing into a black ocean as we turned northeast and climbed. Seatbelt sign-off, soft chimes, the ritual started. Carts, coffee, the endless ballet of asking if anyone wanted the vegetarian pasta. I caught one eye with the calm habit of practice and move on. Chicken or pasta? Pasta. Water? Please. My hands were an assembly line. If I thought at all, it was about how much longer I'd live on the adrenaline of being new, and how long until I could trade the mid-cabin for something a little quieter. We crossed the Canadian coast at flight level 350, Mach 0.84, tucked under a high sheet of cloud that made the moon a soft coin. Oceanic clearance came in and I didn't hear it, but I knew when the cockpit got it. A slight change in the sensation of speed, the way the crew call light winked and then went dark. The captain, Harper, an old hand with a West Texas patience, had given us the usual briefing. NAT track eastbound, good tailwinds, planned arrival in London just after sunrise. If I had to place a bet on where we were when everything changed, I'd say somewhere between the moment Lena handed me an extra stack of napkins and the moment the violinist, Emily, stopped a child from kicking the seat in front of him with a smile that was almost a lullaby. Row 38, seat E, pressed the call button. The man was in his 50s, compact, traveling in a wrinkle-free shirt that said consultant, even before the badge lanyard in his pocket. He had that polite half-grimace people use on flight attendants to apologize for needing something. "Could I get," he said, and then his eyes slid off focus like a picture pulled off a wall. He folded, boneless, knees pinning against the seat row ahead before he slumped into the aisle. Everything else collapsed around that sound. I was kneeling. Then I was shouting for Jules, for the medical kit, for the AED, a voice I heard and recognized as mine. Oksana appeared like she'd been summoned. Lena was there with the kit before I could finish the sentence. We did what we were trained to do, check responsiveness, breathing, pulse. We cleared the passengers away with practiced apologies, and the aisle became a little island of bright light. I peeled open the AED pads with hands that didn't shake until I wasn't thinking about them. "Ravi Patel, cardiologist," a passenger said, falling to his knees across from me, already putting on the nitrile gloves we handed him. He wore a sweatshirt, wire-rimmed glasses, the kind of calm that made you want to obey him without understanding why. We made room. Dr. Patel listened, watched, guided. "No, you're doing it right," he said, when I did the thing I'd practiced more times than I could count. "Keep going. When you train for emergencies, you rehearse the steps. You don't rehearse the faces. You don't rehearse the wife 2 rows back, whispering his name like it's a prayer you can land with. You don't rehearse the way the cabin hum tightens around a circle of strangers all pretending not to watch. We followed the AED prompts, we followed procedure. The calm voice in the box spoke and we obeyed. We were precise and careful and kind. And then, after a long minute, the machine told us to stop. The man on the floor did not look like a man who would get up again. We carried him to the aft galley and laid him out of the aisles, draping the light blanket we are allowed to call privacy, when the euphemism hurts less than reality. Jules sat with the wife in row 40. Oksana held her hand as if it were something she could tether back to the earth. Lena took the interphone and made the kind of announcement that seals the cabin like a jar. Quiet, respectful, distant as the ocean below us. I breathed in the metal and coffee, a scent of wet paper and warm plastic. I looked at my watch and then didn't. You tell the time in steps after that. Step 1, you clean up. Step 2, you reset. Step 3, you go back out and pretend you are a person who hands out water and smiles. Half an hour later, the blanket moved. I didn't see it, Jules did. She let out a sound I'd never heard her make. A breath dragged over gravel, and when I pivoted, the blanket was sliding off the shoulders of row 38E as if air were pushing it from below. I've spent hours in turbulence so rough the cups levitate. I've watched lightning dance along wingtips like a magician's trick, and I have never felt the cabin go so quiet, so completely as it did when that blanket spilled to the galley floor. He sat up in a single mechanical movement. Dr. Patel was already there, his hands up, that firm, calm voice on a notch I recognized from emergency rooms. "Sir, can you hear me? Are you—" The man's eyes were open but wrong, glazed and empty as if the world no longer sent any messages worth receiving. His jaw worked once, like something trying to unstick. He made no sound. Kelly, who had sat through boarding, unnoticed like a shadow, was suddenly a presence. "Everybody step back," she said to the few of us in the aft galley, and her hand went to her belt under the bland gray jacket in a movement meant to be more warning than threat. "Sir, I need you to stay seated." The man turned his head to the voice like a radar dish. He focused, not on Kelly, not on her hands, but on the rhythm of her breath, or the tremor of her throat. Later, I would only remember that he seemed to hunt for the edges of sound rather than the sound itself. He moved fast. He didn't lunge with the weight of an athlete, he didn't scream. He simply tilted forward and stood and took a step and then another. And when Dr. Patel put a palm up to keep space, the man's jaw clamped down. Not hard enough to be a movie, not rough enough to draw anything dramatic, but hard enough, on the doctor's sleeve, to make the fabric snap and to make the human math change. Kelly was on him in an instant, not a weapon raised, no drawn drama, just hands, training, restraint. "Help me," she said. We helped. We carry restraint kits, nylon cuffs, tough Velcro. We know how to use them, not as punishment but as safety. We pinned the man's arms, and he fought in spasms that didn't carry intent so much as the muscle memory of a body that didn't know what it was doing. He didn't speak. He didn't blink as if blinking were something negotiable he'd opted out of. We got him down. We restrained wrists, then ankles. We cinched the strap across his hips and shoulders. Dr. Patel checked him. Careful. The sleeve of his sweatshirt torn, his arm reddened where the man's teeth had scraped without breaking skin. "It's okay," the doctor told me, and maybe himself. "I'm okay." "Call the cockpit," Lena said to me. "Tell them we have a situation." I grabbed the interphone at the aft galley's panel, selected FLT deck, pressed call. The triple chime replicated through the ceiling. Our engraved little light above the door went from dark to shy amber. No answer. I waited 5 seconds, I called again. I called the forward interphone and watched Lena press the same button at 1L, then 1R, then 2L. No answer. We didn't panic. Pilots miss calls. Maybe they were on a HF check with Shanwick. Maybe they were running a fuel recalculation because the forecast winds weren't quite the winds we were flying. "Try again," Lena said. I did, then again, then again. Nothing. The sat phone is a beige rectangle at the purser's station with a keypad that remembers long distance like a habit. Lena dialed company operations on speed dial, and then she was speaking in that strange half-language FAs use with the dispatch, heavy on details, light on adjectives. Medical event escalated. Passenger previously unresponsive, now ambulatory, now restrained, she said. No cockpit response to interphone. Silence. No response. We are at cruise. Yes. Cabin secure. Yes, we have a medical professional. She looked at Dr. Patel. He nodded and tried to smile. "We're patching you to our dispatcher and the duty pilot," the voice on the phone said in a tone that deliberately refused to say the word emergency. Lena pressed the speaker so we could all hear the texture of someone in a fluorescent room, too bright for this hour, somewhere in Queens. "We'll also notify ATC," the voice continued. "If you can, try the emergency cockpit access code." We all looked at the forward door as if we could see the code through the metal. Cockpit doors aren't props. They're built to be break-proof. On our 777, the door could be opened from the cabin using an emergency keypad. A code that sends a request, rings in the cockpit, and then either gets approved and opens after a delay, or gets denied and locks the door down. The code is for when someone in the cockpit is incapacitated. It's not a shortcut to go play with the radios. I'd never used it. Lena took a breath like a swimmer. "Keep things calm back here," she said to me. "I'll try." Before she reached 1L, row 38, he started making a sound. It wasn't groan or a moan. It was as if his throat had discovered it could vibrate and decided to test the range. The pitch rose, not loud but steady, and when 2 passengers peeked around the galley partition to stare, he angled his head toward them with that slow mechanical motion again, and the pitch drifted towards where they stood, like he could feel their attention on his skin. Oksana didn't speak. She simply stepped in front of their line of sight and lowered her palms like she was asking an argument to sit down. I heard my own breathing and that sound, and the hum of the airplane around us felt less like noise and more like a blanket I could pull up to my chin. "Hey," Jules said softly to me because we were both staring. "He's listening." It got stranger quickly. You know how a cabin breathes. The sigh of vents, the murmur of voices, the click of plastic trays, the rattle of ice in a cup. Row 38E tracked it all with that wrong steadiness, that unmoving face mapped onto moving parts. When a baby 4 rows up whimpered, his throat note shifted so cleanly toward it that the mother clamped a hand over the child's ears reflexively. When the service cart vibrated against the floor a little unevenly, the pitch found the tremor and matched it like it wanted to become it. I realized precisely when Kelly realized that we had to make the airplane as silent as possible. "Lights down," she said. and I got it in my bones before my head did. In the movie, where this story would be untrue, you'd turn the lights up to blind a problem. Here, we dimmed to a red-eyed darkness, to the softness that says night. We hushed the cabin without telling anyone we were hushing it. The air marshal's voice stayed low. "Everyone, please stay seated. If you need to speak, whisper. If you have a device, please mute sound and dim screens." No one argued. We secured the aft galley as if turbulence had been forecast. Trays latched, carts stowed, nothing loose. We slid 2 extra carts across the aft aisle, braked and cross-strapped their handles to the stanchions. Not a barricade, not in any movie sense, but something that made the aisle narrower, the approach slower, the instinct to move forward less automatic. We layered a blanket over the restrained man without trying to cover his face, because everything in me told me that something about sight mattered as much as sound. I tried the cockpit interphone again, nothing. Lena reached the door with the keypad and pressed the emergency sequence. The cabin around us felt like a held breath. There's a delay built into the system, 30 seconds to a minute, so that someone inside the cockpit can deny the entry. If the door doesn't get denied, it unlocks for a few seconds. "Come on," I murmured, as if the door could hear me. "Come on." I caught, through the thin hush, the rapid, ragged sound of Lena's breathing over the speaker when she finally spoke. The keypad timed out. A pause. "I'll try again." Her voice was too level to be anything but practice. If they're not answering, they're not denying. We all heard the unspoken third option and let it sit in the aisle like another passenger. The cabin shifted. It wasn't just row 38E. A teenager 2 rows forward stared unfixed at the seat back, eyes wide. A man near the lavs stood to stretch, tipped once to the left, caught himself, and sat back down as if nothing odd had occurred. A child who had been feverish at boarding now slept so hard his mother touched his forehead with 2 fingers every few minutes, in a rhythm that looked like a metronome. "There's something going around," Dr. Patel said, almost to himself. Not an announcement, more like an admission. "I thought earlier." He didn't finish. He was flexing his arm where the bite had caught cloth and skin. He wasn't bleeding. There was no drama to the mark, just pressure turned to a half-moon of pink. He looked at Kelly, who looked back, both of them measuring a concern in millimeters. Lena tried the keypad again. This time the latch clicked. If you've never heard that sound, an armored door acknowledging your existence, it's gentler than you'd expect. The lock withdraws like a throat clearing. The door opened 3 inches, then 6. Lena pushed in. Silence hung, and then it broke in 2 because the cabin suddenly had its own problems. Row 38E tore the blanket. It wasn't noise that set him off, it was something else. Maybe the wind shear shimmy that rippled the tail for a second, maybe a breath I can't remember taking. He jerked against the restraints with a force completely at odds with what a restrained person usually does. The nylon cut into his wrists and he found the tolerance of the strap and worked in ugly little millimeters against it. His neck arched, head twisting toward the aisle, wrong and smooth. "Do not approach," Kelly said, her voice quiet but carrying the way a violin carries under a cello. She held her hands open as if ready to catch a body that didn't know it was a body. 5 rows up, the feverish child let out a cry. The man's head snapped in that direction, and the pitch in his throat shifted up like a radio tuning toward a station. "Shh," Oksana whispered to the mother. "Hold him here," she said, guiding the child to press his face into her shoulder. She looked at me with the look usually reserved for instructors. "We need to move now." "We're going to collect anyone showing signs," I told myself as much as the other 3 attendants. Though by then it was really just the 2 of us, because Lena was in the cockpit and Jules had gone forward to help her. We're going to bring them to one place. We're going to keep everyone else as quiet as possible. I felt for the radio at my hip and then remembered, we don't wear radios. Our voices are our radios. We worked the aisles in long, soft passes, whispering, if you feel faint, please raise your hand. If you have a fever, if you feel off, please let us know. Most passengers looked at us as if we were describing a stranger's problem. 2 raised hands, then 4. One woman admitted she'd skipped her medication that day because she hadn't wanted to open her pill organizer in security. A man confessed to a headache so strong it made the whites of his eyes thread with red. We moved them carefully to the mid-cabin center section, crossing seatbelts over armrests to confine the area without making it feel like a cage. In the rear galley, row 38E's restraints started to give. The ankle strap loosened by a centimeter, then 2. Kelly noticed at the same moment I did. She looked at the cabin, at me, at the aft door. Do not open a door in flight, my training whispered in my skull. Do not. The airplane kept doing airplane things. In the indifferent, loyal way a machine always does them whether you're ready or not. A tiny tone from somewhere in the front suggested a minor course correction. The hiss of conditioned air stayed a lullaby. The aisles narrowed under dim lights, and the faces between armrests became islands you sailed past, inventorying each for signs of panic. I glanced forward to the cockpit door. It was fully open now. Lena stood in the threshold, her shoulders squaring into a frame I knew meant the worst had occurred and had already been admitted to. I didn't need the words. The captain's seat was filled by a shape that didn't move. The first officer's seat answered the same description. The autopilot, stronger than any one person, held us steady in a straight line over an ocean that did not care if we skimmed its night. Dispatch is on the line, Jules said from just behind Lena. They're patching Shanwick and Shannon. A beat. We don't know what to ask. The airline's duty pilot came over the sat phone like a teacher walking into a gym at lunch. His tone left no room for the part of my brain that wanted to collapse into the jump seat and sleep this all away. Cabin crew, he said, his voice level. You're doing fine. First things first. Are you stable? Any smoke? Fire? Decompression? Negative, Lena said, in a voice that would have made any flight instructor pass her. Cabin is stable. Several passengers are febrile. One restrained in the aft galley. Flight deck unresponsive. Autopilot appears engaged. We're eastbound on our cleared track. All right, said the duty pilot. We're declaring an emergency on your behalf with ATC. Stay on your cleared track for now. We are scrambling assistance. Do not attempt to remove any pilot from the seat unless absolutely necessary. Do you have any pilot-qualified passengers? It had never occurred to me to ask. Any pilots on board? I said, stepping onto the PA, and my voice sounded like sand. If you are a current or former pilot, please press your call button. The cabin lit like a low constellation. 2 here, 1 there. A man in a navy sweater and premium economy stood and made his way forward with a controlled urgency that read as someone who didn't want to spook a horse. He introduced himself as Ben Morales, instrument-rated private pilot and AANDP mechanic. The caution in his voice telling me he knew exactly how not a Boeing 777 that sounded. I liked his eyes immediately, curious without bravado. We pulled him to the threshold and let him look without touching. He took in the flight displays like a person reading a foreign alphabet they'd always wanted to learn. Altitude 350, he murmured. Mach 0.84, LNAV, VNAV, FMS following the flight plan. He didn't sit, he didn't lay hands on anything. He knew better than to pretend. Can you talk to ATC? The duty pilot asked through the phone. We'll get you on guard if needed." "The radios are in the cockpit," Lena said quietly. "Okay," the duty pilot said. "There's a cabin sat phone. That's enough. We've notified the NAT controller. RAF and Irish authorities are informed. We want to bring you to Shannon. Long runway, good weather tonight. Rescue services on alert. Ben, do not touch anything unless we tell you," he added gently. "And thank you. We will try for a supervised auto land. The 777 can do it if we can get the approach armed in time. Someone will read you what to push and when, but we have hours, so let's keep the cabin calm." We didn't have hours, we had fuel. I checked the nearest screen like a nervous tick and remembered there wasn't one for me, only for them, and they weren't talking. "Fuel?" I said to the air, to Lena, to the absent captain who owed us numbers. The duty pilot answered as if he'd heard my thoughts across a metal ocean. "Based on your scheduled load and winds, you have about 4 hours remaining," he said. "Shannon is within reach with reserves." A pause, human and full of our names without saying them. "We're with you." We went back to the cabin like soldiers who couldn't afford to admit what battlefield they were on. We distributed water quietly. We confiscated anything that beeped. We asked people to breathe through scarves and masks if they had them, didn't call it a request, just a suggestion that felt safer than the word. We seatbelted the ones whose eyes had gone wide and glassy and checked on them every 5 minutes. We spoke to each other in half sentences that somehow contained the whole message. Row, 38. E toward the ankle strap. It was a small victory, but the kind that gathers momentum. He twisted his hip, slid his knee under the remaining strap, arched, and made the kind of progress you only make if you don't know you're supposed to stop. Kelly knelt by his shoulder, not touching him, ready to move the instant a movement became a lunge. She had a pair of flex cuffs in her hand like extra fingers. "I can't keep him down forever," she said quietly, not for drama, just as inventory. "Noise is a trigger," I said, feeling the truth settle in my stomach like ballast. "Light and movement, too." Oksana nodded. She had an economy blanket in both hands, not as a shroud, but as a curtain she could raise between the restrained and anything that might pull him forward. She was a statue in the soft red light. 2 hours passed like 15 minutes. Every time I checked my watch, I couldn't believe it had moved. The cabin was a world of whispers. Somewhere closer to the rear, a man started humming under his breath. One low note. Row, 38. E's throat matched it, and then drifted as if looking for harmony in the pitch of the airplane itself. Dr. Patel's face had gone pale. He sat with his hand on his arm, pressing and releasing like the motion could move discomfort around enough to reduce it. "I'm okay," he said every time I asked. Ben stayed at the cockpit threshold, phone on speaker, receiving a kind of remote type rating from a duty pilot who must have been pacing a conference room somewhere at our headquarters. "We're going to work with Shannon on a Cat 3 approach," the duty pilot said. "When we're closer, I'll have you set the ILS, arm approach mode, extend flaps when I tell you, lower the gear. We'll let the airplane land itself if we can. There will be no reverse thrust, don't worry about that. The auto brakes will do a lot. Speed brakes should deploy automatically, but I need you to be our hands, and I need you to heed every instruction precisely." "Copy," Ben said, as if he'd spent his life preparing to listen that carefully. We angled south of a line of weather. No one told me. I felt it in my bones. The slight rattle, the way your ears can feel a turn that your eyes can't see. The cabin rustled and then worked hard not to rustle. "Good," Kelly murmured to no one in particular when we slid past the stutter without anyone crying out. Then, somewhere around 3 hours after I'd watched Manhattan dissolve into the Atlantic, the cabin lost a name. Jules didn't answer when I called for gloves from the forward galley. I found her 2 rows in front of 2L, sitting on the jump seat with her head in her hands. She looked up and smiled as if I'd interrupted a nap. "It's fine," she said. "I just need a sec." Her forehead glistened. Her shoulders shook once. "Do you want water? I can get you." She stood and the world tilted under her, or maybe under me. I put my hands on her shoulders without thinking, like a friend in a bar. "Sit," I said. "I'll get water." I got Oksana, who had the preternatural calm of someone who had made it through more than one winter where electricity was a suggestion. When I looked back, Jules was asleep with her chin folded onto her chest, breathing like a bird. "I'll stay with her," Oksana said. "Go." I went back to the aft galley. Row 38. E had gotten another inch. Kelly hadn't moved except to keep him from twisting an arm where it would hurt something. She looked, in that moment, like an anchor disguised as a person. "He's going to get free," she whispered. "We need a plan." "What if we move him forward?" I asked, hearing how stupid it was as I said it. "No," she said, gentle. "Containment is good here. If he breaks into a bottleneck where we have carts and straps. You'll go forward. You'll keep the mid-cabin calm. I'll hold this end." "You don't," I began, as if this were a negotiation about courage and not strategy. "Go," she said, and nothing in her said doubt. A sat phone chime from forward. Lena's voice cut the red hush like a candle. "Aiden, we're 20 minutes from top of descent." A beat, then, "We have an escort." I peered out 3L and saw it. A green-gray arrow of an RAF Typhoon gliding 100 yards off our wing, like a metallic shepherd. I didn't know how to feel about a fighter that close to a passenger airplane. Comfort, and something too sharp to be comfort. "Shannon approach has you," the duty pilot said over the sat phone. "Ben, we're going to work through a simplified checklist. Aiden, I'll need the cabin prepared for an emergency landing. You know the drill." I knew the drill. I did not know it in the dark with a restrained listening man tearing nylon in an aft galley, but I did what I was trained to do. I took the PA and used my most human voice. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, and realized I meant the words like a benediction. "We are going to be landing in Ireland. We need your help. Please remove anything on the floor by your feet and stow it. Tighten your seatbelt low and tight. Put your seatbacks upright and your tray tables up. If you're in an exit row, review the card. In a few minutes, we'll demonstrate the brace position. Please follow our crew's instructions and keep the cabin quiet." I moved briskly down the aisles, the way a heartbeat moves blood. I reseated a mother with an infant near 2L. I made eye contact with people I'll never see again and put my palm on shoulders like I could press courage through cloth. I moved the feverish to seats where another passenger volunteered to sit next to them and watch. I left row 38E where he was, watched by Kelly and by luck itself. Forward, the training at the threshold of the cockpit turned into a dance. "Set altimeter to local pressure," the duty pilot said. "Lower altitude selector to 2000. The Typhoon's pilot in our headset, patched via phone, a miracle of bureaucracy and urgency, spoke like a metronome. "You're captured on the ILS localizer. Glide slope alive. When I say arm approach mode." Ben's hands hovered like a surgeon. "Approach armed," he said when told. The duty pilot, speed to 210 knots. A pause that felt longer than it could have been. "Flaps 5, good, now 180, flaps 15. Good, landing gear down. 3 greens?" Lena leaned in, checked with a careful glance that felt like touching a sleeping person's forehead. 3 greens. The cabin leaned with the nose, the way a theater leans toward a stage. I made the brace announcement in that measured cadence we use on smoke drills when the dummy burns, but not enough to frighten you. "Heads down," I said when it was time. "Stay down." The 777, bless it, did 777 things. It rode the beam like a train on a rail, our believers at the end of a continent keeping their hands off where hands would have made things worse. Autothrottles moved by themselves. The pitch held. The glide slope needle wandered a little and then came back like a child to a fence. I could tell we were skimming cloud because the cabin light changed from black to gray to the pale suggestion of morning, even though it wasn't morning. In the aft galley, row 38E found the last inch. He jerked his ankle free and bucked so suddenly that the cart closest to his foot rattled. Kelly was on his shoulders in the same motion, not to punish but to angle him in a direction that wouldn't cut someone else. He was stronger than he looked. He arched his back and twisted, and the throat sound he made found something in the air, some resonance in the airplane's structure, and matched it perfectly at a pitch that made the hair on my arms lift. "Stay in your seats," I said to no one and everyone. Up front, the duty pilot's voice was a string over a bow. 1,000, stable, no changes. Ben, hands off the yoke. Do not fight the autopilot. 200, 100, 50, 40, 30, 20. The airplane flared itself, the autothrottles retarded to idle, and then, without drama, without, frankly, permission, gravity made its simple argument and we were on the ground with a long, soft, endless sigh and the scrubbing rumble of tires finding a place to be. Spoilers blossomed on the wings like a held breath released. Auto brakes bit. We decelerated down the runway's long Irish truth with fire trucks winking their lights in lines. Somewhere on the left, the Typhoon peeled away into a climb like a falcon. We slowed, we rolled, we stopped. The cockpit made a soft noise that meant the brakes were done braking, and the radios, which still belonged to men who couldn't talk, said nothing. No reverse, no taxi, no movement at all. The airplane became a building with wheels. "We're down," Lena said, unnecessary and perfect. On my way to 1L, I saw Ben sit down on the cockpit threshold and stare at his hands as if he'd been given them 15 minutes ago. I put my palm on his shoulder without asking permission. "You did it," I said. He didn't say anything back. His eyes were full of a silence that felt like gratitude and shock. Emergency vehicles lined up like a string of candles. A firefighting crew in silver suits approached 1L. We had to make choices quickly now, the kind that counted even more on the ground than in the air. An evacuation can hurt people all by itself. Slides are not gentle. But the aft galley had stopped being a galley and started being a problem with legs. "Prepare doors," Lena said, her voice making the decision for us. "Evacuation at 1L and 1R only. Keep everyone forward." I ran the arming lever at 1L down and felt the weight of the slide raft accept its fate. I waited for the thumbs up from outside. The firefighter gave me a wide circle with his hand. I cracked the door. The slide bloomed into the gray Shannon light with the sound of canvas accepting air. Cool, damp mist slid into the cabin. I shouted the words, "You practice until your dreams learn them. Come this way, leave everything. Arms crossed, jump and slide." And people came, orderly, astonishingly so. It turns out when you trust people, they know how to be worthy of it. The violinist pressed her lips to the case as if to apologize, set it on a seat, and went. The couple with the overhead bin entitlement suddenly became the best traffic sheriffs I've ever seen. A teenager who had been flat with fear became a translator for a family who didn't understand our words, but understood our hands. In the aft galley, row 38E had gotten to his knees. Kelly held his shoulder with the force of geometry instead of strength, angling his vector into the metal of the floor. "Go," she said to me without looking up. "I'll be last." "I'm not leaving you," I said, "because sometimes you say the obvious even though everyone knows it." "I know," she said. "Go." We cleared 5, then 20, then 50 down the slide. Firefighters at the bottom caught arms and steadied people like they were lending balance, not control. I tasted Ireland's damp on my teeth and knew in my bones we were somewhere green. I eased a grandmother to the door and told her she would be okay with the authority of a confession. She was crying before she moved, and then she was brave. When the cabin was nearly empty, I looked back and saw only 3 figures: Lena by the forward galley, calm and stubborn, Kelly at the aft, a line of muscle and patience, and row 38E, now standing, restraints dangling in ribbons. He didn't rush, he didn't pounce, he didn't bite or scream or perform anything a movie would make him perform. He simply stood in that wrong angle, listening to angles we didn't hear. We backed toward the forward door together. The firefighting team, seeing through the windows that something was wrong, but not what, gestured for us to move faster. "Come," I said to Kelly. She didn't look. "Now," she said. And then she did a thing I did not expect. She took 2 steps back toward row 38E and opened her hands wider. He turned, like a sunflower finding light. She made a small sound, a soft, unthreatening hum that matched the pitch the airplane had hummed at for 7 hours, and he followed it 1 step, then another, like a moth follows a porch lamp. She guided him toward the lavatory like a bullfighter who loves bulls, closed the door gently, braced it with a service cart in a single motion, and then sprinted forward far faster than a calm person should be able to sprint. We went down the slide together, the 3 of us, arms crossed, knees slightly bent, the way training says protects ankles and dignity. The ground felt impossible under my shoes. I took 3 steps and sat because the earth was bigger than I remembered. I will skip the part where someone put a blanket around my shoulders, and I realized I was still wearing my service apron. I will skip the part where paramedics took Dr. Patel's vitals and found numbers that made their eyebrows knot in professional ways. I will not skip the part where the RAF pilot who had flown on our left walked up with his helmet under his arm and said in a voice human enough to be Irish, "Fair play to you." I will not skip the way Lena hugged him without asking. Etiquette be damned. The airport fire chief asked how many on board. Lena told him. He asked how many sick. She told him. He asked how many crew. She looked at me and then at him and then at her hands. We didn't say those numbers out loud. Authorities took over with the slow ballet of people who know how to move fast without making rushing noises. Medical teams boarded. Police in soft voice posture lined the slide and the door. Someone quietly unarmed a potential world of worst-case scenarios with competence. They had learned words for what this was in other places, earlier in the week, I would later learn, and they applied those words here with a kind of gentle authoritarianism that made me want to nap for a month. We were shepherded, counted, recounted, and then asked to sit in an echoing, bright-lit room that used to be immigration for flights from Boston and is now probably a story someone tells their grandkids. Coffee arrived. Bottles of water appeared like rain. Someone pressed a sandwich on me and I ate it like the act itself could prove I was alive. A doctor with a badge that said HSE talked to us one by one. "Any injuries?" she asked. "Any unusual symptoms?" She touched my wrist, my forehead, the back of my neck. I told her about row 38E's listening. Her eyebrows did a tiny private dance at that. "We've seen that," she said, so quietly I almost didn't hear it. "It's in the noise. The body follows the hum." She didn't elaborate. I didn't ask for more than she could give. Eventually, after the police questions whose delicacy I will remember longer than the questions themselves, after the calls home that sounded like weather reports from a planet someone else lives on, after the orchestra of officials moved from crescendo to coda, I found myself outside under a sky the color of pewter and then, mercifully, a slow wash of blue. The slide had been deflated and draped like a tired sail. The 777 sat dignified and enormous, as if it hadn't just done magic. Men in Tyvek drifted around its wheels like dandelion seeds. Kelly came to stand next to me without sound. She put her hands in her jacket pockets and looked at the airplane like a person looks at a house they built and then had to leave. "You handled it," she said. It sounded like a verdict. "You saved us," I said. It sounded like a prayer in a record entry. She shrugged against the Irish wind. "We saved each other. That's the only kind worth saving." "How many?" I asked. Not sure if I meant passengers or crew or restraints that hadn't failed us until they did. She shook her head once, not unkindly. "Enough to make the next part count," she said. Later, in a room that doesn't have a name because you don't know the names of rooms you only see once in a life, someone asked me to write the report. I did, in block letters at first until the adrenaline filtered out and handwriting rejoined muscle memory. I wrote about seats and rows and times and temperatures. I wrote about the sound in a man's throat like a tuning fork. I wrote about a door that opened because a code said it should and because no one inside could stop it. I wrote about a private pilot with quiet eyes and a duty pilot whose voice built a bridge across an ocean. You want me to say what this was. You want me to name it beyond the word we whispered and didn't. I don't know if I can. I know only the particulars. A wide body over the Atlantic at 35,000 feet. A junior flight attendant with a jump seat by 3L. A purser with a spine made of piano wire. An air marshal whose hands could move fate by inches. A doctor who held back fear with information. A plane that flew itself long enough for the world to meet us where we could meet it. I used to think my job was to get people peanuts and patience. Now, I know it's this. To turn an airplane into a neighborhood when it has to be. Careful and quiet and kind. And to make a path through the worst night toward any light that looks like morning. They asked if I wanted to see the cockpit one last time before the authorities sealed it. I said yes because some part of me needed to say goodbye. Not to men I barely knew, but to the place itself. The glass, the handles, the muscle memory shaped into buttons. I stood in the threshold where Ben had stood, where Lena had taken a breath for all of us, and I listened. The airplane was quiet finally. The hum fractioned down into mere silence. My heartbeat was the loudest thing in the room. Days later, when I flew again, I touched each galley latch like a rosary coming back to a hand. I spoke softer during night service as if quiet itself were a kind of armor. I watched my passengers for fevers and for kindness, and saw more of the second than I would have bet on during boarding. Somewhere, in a warehouse in Shannon, I imagine, there's a set of nylon cuffs in a Ziploc bag, tagged and logged. Somewhere, in a dispatch office, there's a recording of a calm voice telling a private pilot how to lower the gear on a jet they'll never fly again. Somewhere on an air base on the west coast of Ireland, a pilot has a story he tells about a metal whale that sang to him in the night and landed like it had made a promise. And somewhere, in the high chords that hang between continents, the hum between 2 points still exists, and we still cross it every night with trays and coffee and a certainty that is not certainty at all, just practice and trust in equal measure. If you ask me what I do for a living now, I won't say flight attendant the way I used to, shy like I owed the world a more complicated answer. I'll say, I am the person who stands in the aisle between two strangers and makes a path. I will also say, I was the last flight attendant left alive at 30,000 feet, on a night when the airplane wanted desperately to be a ship, and we let it be both, and it kept its word. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.